Lee and I write in our book that we think the commission in many ways was set up to fail because we had not enough money, we didn't have enough time, we had been appointed by the most partisan people in Washington, the leaders of the House and Senate.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Stand Your Ground Studio. This is Scott, and today I want to talk to you about the Bush presidency, 9/11, and World War III. Now I think this is a video for both conspiracy theorists and non-conspiracy theorists alike, because by almost no one's account does the evidence of 9/11 quite add up to the official story, no matter what your theory is. And the reason why I say it pertains to all of us is because I don't think the story of 9/11 is complete just yet, and that they will be revealing more information and it's going to affect all of us in the not too distant future. And I say that because there is a mountain of coverage by mainstream media that has happened over the years, and what they'll do is they'll release it kind of piecemeal. There's a story over here 1 year, a couple years later there's another story, and it's getting more and more rapid. And you'll read one and then you'll forget what you read, then a year later you read another, and it's kind of piecemeal. But if you line them all up, there's actually a story being told, and they're pointing us in a very specific direction. And if you look at the signals that the media is giving us, something's about to happen. So, quick overview. The 28 missing pages and or other information will expose corruption in high places. This is going to, what I call, externalize the hierarchy. Certain powers that be will be exposed as being corrupt. It'll be in business and politics. Bush administration is going to be right in the middle of all of it. And a lot of these people like to hold what they call Christianity close to them. I think they're going to help drag that down too. The timing of it all is going to be terrible. It's going to help escalation of world events towards what will be World War III. This will enrage the masses, and possibly it will be released as society begins to wobble and unravel. So if you can imagine the fear and anger that was happening back during 9/11, it's going to bring up that old hurt. And people, of course, are going to respond emotionally to the news that comes out. And most importantly, this is going to work because they're not creating something new. They're just exposing corruption that we all kind of know exists. And people are going to feel betrayed by it because they have been betrayed by it. It's just what the system is choosing to expose to us. And we need to be careful about the lie that they sell to us as they expose truth. Okay, so we'll start with the most important element of the whole thing, which is the GOP. GOP has been getting increasingly crazy over the years, for lack of a better word, but they really have just gone off the reservation lately. And it's not that they have controversial views about things, it's how they present themselves. And none of these presidential candidates on the GOP side is even remotely acting like someone who is running for president. To me, they're basically actors, and they're out there to say the most outrageous things possible and to not back down on what they said. They always seem to double down on it, and they don't apologize. They just keep attacking people, coming up with the craziest statements that, of course, can easily be contradicted with their beliefs or their actions in the past. And it's just driving everyone nuts that I know, and they just want to see these people go away. So you can see all the stuff that's on the screen right here. Here's one thing that popped up today. I don't know what this accomplishes. If you're running for president, you don't put that up there. That's all I'm saying. He's not even saying anything. He leaves it wide open. Hey, here's a gun with my name on it, right at the time when all these mass shootings are going on. I don't care. They're not running for president. That's what I'm saying. You can believe whatever you want. So, back in September, I'm going to run you through a few articles that really started to make this whole train of thought click for me. So yeah, they're acting all kinds of crazy, and whenever they say something really controversial, they put their faith right out there in front of them as like a guardian, like this is why I say what I say. And when stuff like this starts to happen, the Pope visited back in September, and Mike Huckabee, who recently had just gone through the Kim Davis episode, attacks President Obama about the authenticity of his faith. He also attacks the Pope as being someone who we shouldn't really be listening to political advice about, and that just allowed the media to turn around and attack everything he says. And all these articles, they'll line up everything that the GOP's been saying, and they just like can immediately attack them for the contradictions in their own actions, because that's what they've been building up. There's no denying it, really. So these articles are written in an authoritative tone that's written just like, I have to remind you, these people are running for president. Can you believe that? Just wrap your head around that. They're being billed more and more and more as the backwards anti-intellectual enemy that could hold this country back so much it could destroy it. And right here, this is also an attempt for this author to draw a distinct contrast between Mike Huckabee's version of faith and the Pope's version of faith, which is much more inclusive. Whatever your opinion about the Pope is, I'm not sure. But Apparently, he's such a shining bright light of truth and inclusiveness that it made John Boehner cry. And the Pope effect had a change on him, where now he turns around and he starts attacking the conservative element that's holding the country back. This is just a few days later. And again, on the element of faith, he calls them false prophets. And to me, this is them sending a little bit more of a message. It's this old Christian element that is tied to old values that maybe just aren't really fit for America anymore. One thing that he goes on to say is that absolutely these people are not realistic. They threaten a government shutdown over, issues like Planned Parenthood. So this clicked in my mind, yeah, this is exactly what they're going to do. They're going to use the GOP as the enemy, and they're going to throw themselves under the bus, and they're going to start tearing themselves apart over the coming weeks and months. They're going to tie their faith to all this corruption, and they're going to come out with something pretty soon. But on the exact same day this article came out, another one comes out. So you can see the headline right there, and what this does is it puts out there basically the globalist agenda from the 20th century, and it spells certain elements of it pretty clearly, and by the end twists a few names around so that we have a new enemy. And everything it describes is pointing at those guys on the left, or what they represent. And I'm just going to read a few key phrases from this article, just to see if you recognize anything that's going on today. So it's about the work done largely by William F. Buckley Jr., who came up with a blueprint for destroying the American consensus. So go ahead and think the culture of outrage that we have right now. Everyone's all divided on every single issue. We can't come to a consensus on anything, whether it's the economy or war or anything like that. So this is written at a time when there was fear of another authoritarian leader coming up, like Hitler or Mussolini. And what Buckley noted is that, the leader's no good without first prepping the masses. And what's described here is mass movements ultimately need a disaffected population, people who are either economically or culturally dispossessed. Those isolated individuals need to feel part of something bigger than themselves. They need to believe they can regain previous relevance. Properly primed, such followers will throw themselves behind a leader who promises to return them to power. So the writer is pushing all this on that old conservative element, but also think about what's going on with the masses right now, with the 99% versus the 1%, the masses being afraid of global warming going to destroy them. Just keep that in mind, especially these next quotes. As society destabilized, these new leaders created an artificial reality that made their discontented followers feel like they were part of something bigger than them, a movement to save society, a movement so important it was worth sacrificing themselves for it. The easiest way to unify followers was with hate. Leaders of such a movement identified a villain. These villains were usually the weakest members of society, making them easy to attack. In a later stage, followers were immune to facts or logic. Indeed, arguing with them only entrenched them in their beliefs. If you've had arguments with people who just won't wake up, you kind of know what I'm talking about. Jumping to the end of the article, this is where they twist it. So in Eisenhower's day, movement conservative leaders from William F. Buckley Jr. to Robert Welch, who began the John Birch Society, harped on the idea that communists had taken over the American government and were selling it out to an international cabal. Does that sound familiar? So then she says Senator Joseph McCarthy took that war into popular media. So she crams a bunch of elements together all real fast at the end so that people miss some detail right there. At a glance, William F. Buckley kind of looks like the element that's being described, but Robert Welch, he was one of the first true conspiracy theorists who went out there and said even the communists are a front for the master conspiracy. And even William F. Buckley turned around and criticized Robert Welch for going that far. So go ahead and look up the John Birch Society today. They're still trying to expose the NWO agenda. I really don't think they fit inside this description. But then she goes on and caps it off with just a mention of Joseph McCarthy, and now those names all get melded together in the same conversation. Read this article, it's kind of eye-opening. It goes on to then make a connection between everything I just said and the Bush administration. And in an interview with a senior Bush advisor, they have a quote where it says, we don't really look at facts anymore. That's not the way the world really works. When we act, we create our own reality. And that echoes what John Boehner said in the article above, which was, again, published on the same day. So this clicked in my mind, okay, yep, they're dipping back into the past. They're going to use old corruption that doesn't really matter anymore to the elite, and they're going to use that as a framework to create an enemy that we need to kick out the door in the near future. So days later, the Jfk assassination popped up. This information had been out for about a year, but they chose a few days later to bring this up. Just looking into it, I found immediate parallels between the Warren Commission and the 9/11 Commission. What they're saying is new information's come out. The CIA director from back then, John McCone, withheld information knowingly. They immediately brushed aside the conspiracy theory that the CIA did it, but he knowingly withheld information that would have just changed history. And we would know a lot more right now. The Warren Commission was outraged in the 70s when they learned that the stuff had been withheld from them. And I'm just going to point out a few themes that you're going to hear again in a little bit. So critical information was withheld. If more information had been shared, the investigation would have definitely gone down different paths. Different departments would have been able to connect different dots. He withheld this information because it would have revealed, a phone tapping program that would have gone on. It might have revealed something about a plot with Castro in '64. And again, it's about making sure that sensitive information doesn't come out and create a larger ripple effect in the political atmosphere around them. And you'll also note on the right there's a quote that's about, as history goes on, people stop worrying about it because it just becomes a part of history. And you're going to hear that about 9/11 again. So why did I bring this up? I think, and it's possible, they're going to use this as a framing device for the near future. They're going to set up a narrative so that people are quicker to respond to what they hear about 9/11 because of the similarities between these two. And it seems like a stretch, I get that. But not long after that, advertisements for this miniseries came out. This is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel where a character falls back through time to the 60s and he has an opportunity to stop the Jfk assassination. And there's all kinds of strange rules that makes it hard for him to do that. But what this really is, it's a framing device so that the audience can travel back in time with him, revisit this old issue and see it from a different angle, and maybe start to unveil a little bit of truth that's always been hidden from us. I'm not going to go too much into it. I will say the production value is top notch, so this is going to count for something. Halfway through the opening credits, you get a golden card with the dragon biting its tail. And they have frequent mentions to going down the rabbit hole. To me, this is meant to get a message out. But just remember that those two articles above, they came out October 6th and October 14th, because 9/11 was mentioned again just 2 days later. But first, real quick, let's jump back in time and just talk about planting seeds in a script. And what you do as a writer is you plant seeds in a script early on so that people, when they see something come up later, they have that aha moment, I knew it. So there's really no argument that Bush withheld information early on. He got in the way of the 9/11 Commission. The mainstream media has even talked about it. He had to be practically sued by families of 9/11 victims to even get it started. He slowed it down. He obstructed funding. And at the beginning of this video, you heard Thomas Keane mention how the 9/11 Commission was set up to fail. And both Thomas Keane and Lee H. Hamilton they made the rounds. They told all the major networks about this. Meanwhile, books came out about connections between the House of Bush and the House of Saud. And even critics of that book agreed on one crucial element, which is that skeptics do have one important point they agree on, which is that this administration is remarkably unconcerned with appearance of impropriety. There's plenty of information about all that, but even in this article from 2002, we already hear about the Wahhabi influence within Saudi Arabia, which is known to fund terrorism in the Middle East through charities and other organizations. And this creates a dubious foundation for the US and the Saudis to pursue Islamic extremists. 2007, there's an article saying you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to be puzzled and want an explanation, or to be skeptical concerning the official version of events. So again, it's not just conspiracy theorists. There was a pocket of lies built into this so that they could be revealed later at an inopportune time. More lawsuits have also been brought up against the Saudis, saying that we have more than enough information saying they're involved. The Saudis want to defend themselves, but the Department of Justice keeps getting in the way, saying potentially significant foreign relations consequences would arise if such suits were allowed to proceed. So it's constantly in this gray area where something's up, but nobody can quite finish the argument. And what's important to realize is that the Obama administration is now in it too, because this is more than about the Bushes and the Saudis. This is a relationship between the U.S. government and the Saudis, which started back in 1945. It's just that the Bushes also have business relationships with them, so that's something to keep in mind. Moving forward a few years, about 2014, all of a sudden we have congressmen and senators telling us they've read these 28 pages and they really need to get them out to the public because there's information in them that we need to know about before we move forward into any more entanglements. So here on Glenn Beck, Glenn has Representative Thomas Massie on the show, and Glenn starts off by saying, I was gravely disturbed by your description where you said you had to stop and refigure history every couple of sentences. Representative Massie goes on to say, we're like sponges when we absorb this stuff, and then when we're done, we think we're done with all the information, history sets up like concrete. For him, he had to start breaking that up and reconfiguring everything. And what's here is not going to tear the country apart, but it will anger people, it will enrage them. There is accountability, there is culpability. It's too late for the previous two wars, but he says if we're going to use 9/11 as a motivation to get involved in these civil wars in the Middle East, then I think the American public need to read these pages and understand what truly caused 9/11 and who our friends and who our enemies are. So there's an entanglement going on, and it goes back to that Wahhabi influence where we don't know who exactly belongs to who and where the funding is coming from, but it's not a stretch of an imagination to show there's an overlap between U.S. interests and terrorist interests. So a couple months later, yet another report comes out, and again we have Republicans and Democrats, congressmen and senators getting the word out. And early on in this article, it mentions that Bush kept the stuff secret due to national security concerns. But Walter Jones, a Republican congressman, says there's nothing in it about national security. It's about the Bush administration and its relationship with the Saudis. Stephen Lynch, a Massachusetts Democrat, says it's stunning in its clarity, and it offers direct evidence of complicity on the part of certain Saudi individuals and entities in al-Qaeda's attack on America. And it can never come out and quite say who or what because they are under oath. It goes on with another quote. Part of the reason it was classified was the fact that it would create a visceral response. There would be a backlash. So there's really no arguing it. They're getting it out there, and they're getting it to the point where people know it's real, but it's just out of arm's reach. So that anticipation builds and builds. So there's going to be very much an outlash so that when it's finally time to release these things, people can be outraged and they can be they're going to demand it, and it's about time, and there will be just no fighting it. So it comes out at probably not a great time. A couple months later, it goes on to talk about this report. Does concede, however, that its conclusion does not exclude the likelihood that charities with significant Saudi government sponsorship diverted funds to al-Qaeda. And this goes back to that Wahhabi influence. It's always these charities, but we never really know who's tied to what. Senator Graham also submitted a statement as part of Tuesday's legal filing saying, "I'm convinced that there is a direct line between at least some of the terrorists who carried out the September 11th attacks and the government of Saudi Arabia." Representative Stephen Lynch said of the 28 pages, they do not contradict Graham's statements. There's more than enough confirmation here saying that it is what it is. It's what I just told you. You can go and look at these articles yourselves for a little bit more clarity in what they're talking about. But we just can't deny it at this point. It's just a matter of when they're coming out. So let's jump back up to October 16th of 2015. It's the date I remember to tell you. It's 2 days after that last JFK article came out. And what happened?
Help us understand who Donald Trump is as a man. I need to know that you will make us feel safe and you will make us feel proud.
I think I have a bigger heart than all of them. I think I'm much more competent than all of them. When you talk about George Bush, I mean, say what you want, the World Trade Center came down during his time. If you look
Hold
at
on,
Sandy Hook,
you can't blame George Bush for that.
he was president, okay? Don't blame him or don't blame him, but he was president. The World Trade Center came down during his reign.
Okay, so that started a whole tweet battle over the course of that weekend. Jeb Bush saying how pathetic for Donald Trump to make that claim. Trump turns around and says, no, you're pathetic for saying that nothing happened during your brother's term and the World Trade Center was attacked and came down. And other pundits left and right got to weigh in, and people all of a sudden got to say what they've been meaning to say for however many years because it's suddenly time to do that. And again, it's that coordinated effort that media tends to do. Everything comes out all at once. And it's not really a coincidence then that these next articles popped up. And the right had apparently been doing a rally cry to get Clinton's emails released to help damage her campaign. And what do you know? At the exact same time, these documents come out saying that Bush and Blair were planning on the Iraq war as much as a year before they actually announced it. And these articles will go, they lean a little bit towards a niche audience, so they go straight out saying he's committed treason, which he may very well have done. They were doing everything they could no matter what happened. They were going to get to war and they were going to go into Iraq. And looking around, this never really got debunked, but it never really showed up in U.S. mainstream media. And by that I mean it didn't show up in like CNN, didn't show up in NBC or CBS or any of them. But in looking around, this never really got debunked. However, it's not entirely new either, because back in 2006, this article came out, and this was, I think, The Guardian. I don't have it written down here. But it's kind of the same deal. Bush and Blair were actually known to have trying to get around, or they were trying to put this together just a couple of months before they announced the war in March of 2003. These memos that were released back then were saying no matter our diplomatic relations have to be centered around a military intervention in Iraq, no matter what happens. So this isn't new. It's just been expanded on as of last October, and then it just kind of died. It didn't go anywhere. And I thought I'd fallen for one of those fake, too big to be true type of stories, but this is still out there and people still are circulating this. But what happened at the exact same time in the core mainstream media? Well, these articles came out at the exact same time. How about that? So again, this is what you call a coordinated effort. They even refer to each other in some of these articles. They take a very authoritative tone and they all attack the Bush presidency and its slow uptake on all the information that the CIA and the FBI was trying to feed them, which led to possibly missing out on stopping the attack, and then everything that came after that, them slowing the investigation and taking us into two wars. And it's a blitz. They absolutely blame everything about the Bush administration. There's no questions about it. Every single one of them, of course, takes conspiracy theories and kicks them aside, but we need to attack Bush. So, key elements in all of them. Lots of requests were coming in from the CIA and the FBI, and they were really slow on the uptake. So, a quick quote: "There's also no evidence that Condoleezza Rice did anything to pulse the national security system for additional information about the presence of jihadist militants in the United States. Might that have caused the information about Zacchaeus Moussaoui to have been more widely distributed? Might that have caused wider dissemination of names of the Al-Qaeda's soon-to-be hijackers who are known by the CIA to be in the United States?" I just put a little flag in there. That kind of echoes back to the Warren Commission and how they kept saying, we had the information, we could have made those connections sooner. Just a parallel there. The Atlantic, there's no way of knowing for sure if Bush could have stopped September 11th attacks, but that's not the right question. The right question is, did Bush do everything he could reasonably have to stop them given what he knew at the time? And he didn't. It's not even close. And this is the tone I'm talking about. Finally, they all get to come out and say what they've been needing to say for years. Never mind all these publications were telling us to shut up and stop questioning him about 10 years ago, but hey, whatever. So yeah, these incidents might have exposed the 9/11 plot had the government been on high alert. So it wasn't an intelligence problem, it was an alert connecting the dots problem. Newsweek kind of says this is defying the taboo. It took somebody like Trump to kick the door down and finally say what we've all been saying. We can finally blame George for this. Maybe he could have done more than we all think he could have. We can rethink history a little bit. And then again, these attacks became a rationale for the war in Iraq, the failed intelligence about weapons of mass destruction, which made it look as if the administration was firing with a blindfold. And again, one more article. This one was published on the exact same day as the one in the Atlantic, and they're already referring to the Atlantic. So these people knew they were going to publish it at the same time. Again, it's a coordinated effort, and it just criticizes a whole lot of things, but it criticizes Jeb's response to Trump and how it leaves him open to talking about how, yeah, we're not really safer, and we had these other two wars happen. So again, it's all about that entanglement, and why did we go to war again, and who are we fighting for, and who's our enemy, and who's our ally? So, real quick, at the exact same time, this just goes back into the GOP is going to throw itself under the bus, or at least tear itself apart. During the time that the right was trying to get Hillary's emails to come out, and they were condemning her, Dick Cheney put in his book and did the same thing. He criticized her for that. So the emails come out. They point at all this wrongdoing within the Bush administration, and Dick Cheney is clearly at the top of the list of people that needs to be looked at. But at the exact same time, Bush Sr. comes out with his biography. Iron-ass Cheney, arrogant Rumsfeld, damaged America, says George Bush Sr. So he pins it on them, so now they're all turning on each other. This all happened during that time. It's just an entanglement, giant he said, she said dynamic. So, 7 days later, what comes up?
A huge drug bust shines a very bright spotlight on one of the little-known drivers fueling the Syrian civil war. The drug is an amphetamine called Captagon. The bust happened in Lebanon. A member of the Saudi royal family allegedly tried to smuggle 2 tons of this stuff out of the country on his private plane.
Yeah, you might not have heard of Captagon, but this is a key source of funding for so much of the mess that's going on right now inside Syria.
Okay, so they go on to talk about what Captagon is. It's very popular. It's easy to make and distribute. And, the profits aren't always so one-sided, and terrorist groups do have other sources of funding. But you'll note on the left there, they also say directly in the article, UN official mentions that it is believed that the Islamic State and al-Nusra do supply the basic ingredients, creating a probable link between them and the Saudis. And there you go again. It's always that probable link. If we just released a little bit more information, we could finally settle this. But I think we need to get a little deeper in the Syrian war before we do that. Rolling forward just a little bit more, just straight up into present day. It's going on overseas too. So we have Labor leader Corbyn suggested Saudi Arabia may be involved in funding the Islamic State, a theory shared by many journalists and Middle East analysts. And there's a whole squabbling back and forth between them and the Saudis. Over on the left, it seems that the lines are blurred between who friends and allies are, so they're playing that up a little bit more. I think I've said that 4 or 5 times already, and I'm just making a point that we have one cohesive story that's developing, and it's going to pop back up very soon. And again, we all know there's a giant entanglement going on right now, both in Syria and all over the world. I threw a few examples up there, and we've seen Russia accuse Turkey of aiding ISIS oil trade, but Turkey and Saudi Arabia are in a coalition, which just happens to be pushing into Syria right about now, or they're going to very soon. If you look at the bottom right, what I have highlighted, the Saudi foreign minister says Bashar al-Assad, who Putin supports, will not be ruling Syria in the future, and Russia's military interventions will not help them stay in power. So they're implying they're ready to clash with Russia alongside Turkey, who is a NATO ally, in order to get their supposed job done. Really, the terrorist side of this is probably going to be the light that ignites the powder keg that will be World War III. And I was thinking to myself, okay, so what... It's kind of died down just a little bit again. And I know Trump is saying what he's saying and getting people, keeping 9/11 alive in people's minds, but what would do it? What would really get the rally cry going? And personally, it popped in my head, terrorist attacks, big ones. U.S. and abroad, whether it's one huge one or they're just everywhere all of a sudden at one time, and all these small attacks. 1 hour later, what pops up on my feed, 60 Minutes did an interview with the director of the CIA telling us that they've already stopped a bunch of ISIS attacks from getting to the U.S., but please expect that it will happen at some point. So there you go. The narrative is now official. It is going to happen, or at least expect it. And you kind of tell where I'm going with this. So this is my last slide. And my conclusion is that, I think we're going to get hit pretty hard in some fashion, which is going to demand that response. And all this is going to coincide with the general unraveling of the economy and society in general. And the anxiety is going to grow, and it's going to grow, and it's going to be the perfect time for that corruption to come out and just escalate the anger and more violence. And if you remember 9/11, we were very malleable afterwards, and we went through some very thorough programming, and I think that's going to happen again on a much bigger scale. It's not enough for the people in charge of the world to crash the system. They could have done that a long time ago. It has to crash and burn in the hearts and the minds of the people, so that when it's gone, we accept what's coming without question. Like, there's just no coming back. Obviously, there's a lot more in the mix, and it's not going to be this simple, but this will happen on some level. So please get this word out. Tell me what you think. Keep an eye out, because all of these stories are suddenly going to come out all at the same time. And if one of our videos happens to be spot on months in advance, that could be used to maybe wake a few people up. All right, great. Well, thank you very much for listening to me. I know this isn't the happiest news, but I had to get the word out on this. Please tell me what you think below. If you haven't already subscribed, please hit that button. And pass this around, whether you like it, hate it, think it's the stupidest thing ever. It's all about circulation. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you next time.